In room 309, the piano only plays when no one is near it. And if you hear it, you might already be too late. A narrator's voice draws us in with grainy, black and white images of a crumbling hotel, flickering lights, a piano in the dark. This is not a story about music. It's about something that refuses to stay silent. Chapter 1: The Move. Daniel Bennett had always been a man of quiet pride, but when he lost his job at the record store after 18 years, something inside him cracked. With bills piling up and their lease terminated, the Bennetts, Daniel, his wife Elise, and their 10-year-old daughter Mia were forced to leave the city behind. They packed their remaining belongings into a beat-up sedan and drove west until the GPS lost signal. That's when they stumbled upon the Briar Glen Hotel. Once a grand retirement home tucked deep in a forgotten town, it now stood like a relic of better days, its faded sign hanging at an angle, creaking in the wind. The hotel's manager, an elderly man with sunken eyes, offered them a long-term stay for next to nothing. "Only one room's ready," he muttered without looking up. "Room 309." Elise hesitated, but Daniel took the key. They didn't have other options. As they climbed the winding staircase to the third floor, the air grew colder. The hallways were silent, lined with yellowed wallpaper peeling at the corners. Room 309 was at the end. When they opened the door, a gust of stale air rushed past them. The room was strange, frozen in time. Dust covered every surface, the bed frame, the nightstands, even the ceiling fan blades, everything, except for one thing. In the corner, illuminated faintly by the afternoon sun, stood a grand piano. It was spotless. Not a single speck of dust. The keys shimmered. It looked new. Daniel stared at it for a long moment, and then smiled. "Guess this place was waiting for us," he joked, trying to lighten the mood, but Elise said nothing. That night, as they unpacked their few belongings, Elise asked the hotel manager about the piano. He shrugged. It came with the room. She pressed further. He paused, glanced around, then leaned closer. "You shouldn't be on the third floor," he said under his breath. "People say things happen up there." Elise frowned. What kind of things? But he'd already turned away. Over the next few days, they settled into a routine. Daniel spent his time by the piano, fingers drifting over the keys, rediscovering melodies he hadn't touched in years. Elise tried to homeschool Mia in the small dining area, but there was a heaviness in the air, a tension that none of them could name. Elise began to notice small things. The hallway light outside their room flickered constantly, even though every other bulb in the building stayed still. The front door to room 309 creaked open every morning, even when she was certain she'd locked it. And at night, just after 3 a.m., she would wake up cold, freezing, despite the heater being on, and always to the same faint sound, a single piano note, echoing softly from the corner. She'd sit up in bed and glance across the room. Daniel would be asleep beside her, the piano untouched. The music, if it was music, already gone. One morning, she asked him if he'd been playing at night. He looked confused. No. Why? She didn't press. That afternoon, as they walked through the lobby, an older woman sitting by the window called out to Elise, "You're in 3." Elise nodded. The woman's smile faded. "I used to work here, back when it was a home for musicians. We kept that room locked for a reason." Elise's heart sank. Why? But the woman shook her head. "If you hear it playing," she said, "don't listen." Elise stood frozen for a moment before hurrying back upstairs. That night, she woke again. The air was ice. The piano was silent. But when she checked the window, it was open. Wide open. She was sure it had been shut. Mia had been coughing more lately, unable to sleep. She began drawing strange pictures. One showed a woman standing next to the piano, her eyes blank and hands red. When Elise asked who it was, Mia only said, "She's the one who sings when Daddy plays." Elise's stomach turned. She took the picture and tucked it away. She didn't want Daniel to see it. He'd been different since they arrived, quieter, more withdrawn. He hardly spoke at meals. He spent hours staring at the piano, even when he wasn't playing. Once, she found him sitting at the bench, not moving, just staring at the closed lid like he was waiting for something. "Daniel?" she asked gently. He didn't answer at first. Then, without looking at her, he whispered, "She only plays when we're asleep." Elise tried to ignore it, to write it off as stress, but deep down, she knew something was wrong with the room. Something was watching them. Something was listening. Chapter 2: The Piano. Daniel hadn't touched a piano in years. After the band broke up and life took over, music became a memory, something he used to do before bills, deadlines, and disappointment. But in room 300, with its peeling wallpaper and musty curtains, the grand piano felt like a message, like a second chance. On their second night, after Elise and Mia went to bed, Daniel lifted the cover and placed his fingers gently on the keys. They were cool to the touch, perfectly in tune. He played softly at first, simple melodies he remembered from years ago. Then, slowly, more complex harmonies returned to him, things he thought he had forgotten. Something about the piano was familiar, intimate, like it already knew what he wanted to play. Elise watched from the bed, half asleep, the warm notes filling the space between them. Daniel seemed lighter afterward, more alive. "It helps me think," he told her the next morning. "Just a little playing before bed." But soon it wasn't just before bed. Daniel began staying up later, midnight, 1, 2, always by the piano. He started scribbling notes in an old notebook. Sometimes he would hum softly under his breath, eyes closed, completely immersed. Elise tried to be patient. After all, this was the most focused he had been in months. But one night, at 3:17 a.m., she woke to the sound of music, soft, delicate notes drifting through the room. She assumed it was Daniel, but when she turned over, he was beside her, asleep. She sat up, heart racing. The piano was playing itself. The notes stopped the moment she stepped out of bed. In the silence, she tiptoed to the corner and stared at the keys. Still, nothing moved. The room was freezing. She gently woke Daniel. He blinked slowly. "Did you leave the piano open?" she asked. He nodded. "Probably. I heard it playing," she whispered, "while you were asleep." Daniel sat up and rubbed his eyes. "It's an old hotel," he said finally. "Sound carries. Maybe someone downstairs." Elise stared at him. There were no guests downstairs. The second and first floors were empty. Still, she didn't argue. The next evening, she watched as Daniel went to the piano again. This time, he didn't play. He just sat there, staring at the keys. His fingers hovered, then dropped. One note, then silence. "Did you hear it last night?" she asked gently. Daniel nodded, almost imperceptibly. "It was beautiful," he murmured. "I've never written anything like it." Elise didn't respond. There was nothing to say. Over the next few days, the music became more frequent. Sometimes she heard faint notes in the early evening, even when no one was near the piano. Other times, Mia would stop and tilt her head. "The lady's song again," she said once, tugging at Elise's sleeve. "It's a sad one." Elise bent down. "What lady?" Mia pointed to the corner where the piano stood. "She doesn't like it when we're loud." That night, Daniel stayed at the piano past 3. Elise woke briefly, saw the faint glow of the desk lamp across the room, and heard him playing something slow and unfamiliar. She fell back asleep, comforted, but woke again to silence. Daniel had returned to bed, but his hands were cold, ice cold. The next morning, Elise asked about the song. Daniel said nothing at first. Then he looked at her, eyes distant. "It's not mine," he said. "It just comes." He tried to laugh it off, but the edge in his voice betrayed him. Elise began noticing changes. Daniel's eyes grew darker. He forgot meals. He spent more and more time at the piano, playing pieces she didn't recognize. Strange, haunting melodies that lingered even after they stopped. When she asked to hear one during the day, he said he couldn't. "It's not the same," he told her. "She doesn't like the light." Elise tried not to react. He paused. "I mean, the music, it feels different at night." Later, she found pages torn from his notebook, covered in musical notations and scribbles, most of it unreadable. In one corner, he had written a single line over and over: "Play for her, play for her, play for her." Elise confronted him gently that evening. "Maybe you should take a break," she offered. "Just for a night." Daniel didn't look up. "I can't. She's close." That night, the music returned. Elise woke again at exactly 3:17. This time, the sound was louder. Full chords, then a pause, then a slow, climbing melody. She got up, heart pounding, and walked toward the piano. Daniel was asleep again. The bench was empty. The piano lid was closed. Still, the notes had been real. She was sure of it. She didn't sleep the rest of the night. In the morning, Daniel seemed agitated. "Did you hear it?" he asked, almost breathless. Elise nodded. "I heard something." "She's not angry," he said quickly. "Just waiting. She wants the last part. I just need to find the ending." Elise didn't know what to say. There was no one else in the hotel. No staff, no guests. Just them and the piano. Daniel no longer spoke during the day. He wrote in silence. He paced, he listened. And always, he returned to the piano after dark. The music was becoming a voice, one only he could hear. And it was growing louder. Chapter 3: Signs. It started with the window. Every night, sometime between 3 and 4 in the morning, Elise would wake to find the living room window wide open. At first, she blamed the faulty latch or the wind, but each time, she would shut it carefully, double-check the lock, and still, by morning, it would be open again. The air that crept in was bitter and strange, colder than it should have been. The curtains moved without wind. The silence that followed felt heavy, like something was holding its breath. Then came the footprint. Just one. On the carpet, right near the piano bench. Muddy, smeared, half faded by morning light, but it hadn't rained in days. Elise knelt beside it, touched the damp fabric, and felt the chill rise up her spine. She said nothing to Daniel. He was too far gone already, lost in pages of notes and late-night melodies only he could hear. Elise began keeping a journal. It started as a way to track the window, the times she woke, the dreams she couldn't explain. But soon the entries became darker. 3:17 a.m. again. Same note playing. The window was open. Daniel not in bed. He won't talk to me. He just smiles when I ask where he goes. On the 5th night, Mia came into the bedroom with her blanket and a glassy look in her eyes. She crawled into bed beside Elise and whispered the lady was there again. Behind Daddy. Elise turned to face her. What lady? Mia's voice was soft. She stands behind him when he plays, but she doesn't have eyes. Elise froze. Did she say anything? Mia shook her head. She just watches. And sometimes she sings. Elise didn't sleep at all that night. The following day, she tried to bring it up with Daniel. He was at the piano, as always, humming something low and discordant. When she mentioned the window, he said he hadn't noticed. When she asked about the footprint, he said it must have been Mia. But when she mentioned the woman, he stopped. What woman? Mia says she sees someone, Elise replied. While you're playing, Daniel's fingers tightened on the edge of the keys. She shouldn't be looking. Elise stepped closer. Who is she, Daniel? He stood up suddenly. There's no one, he said sharply. It's just a song. That's all this is. But that night, Elise wrote in her journal again, something is in this room with us. Daniel won't stop playing. Mia won't sleep. I'm afraid we're not alone here. The temperature dropped again. Elise noticed it most around the piano. The corner of the room felt like standing near an open freezer. Her breath would fog in the air if she stood too close. She started sleeping with the lamp on, though it did little to ease her nerves. Every sound seemed louder. Every creak in the floorboard felt deliberate. And Daniel was slipping. His hands shook when he wasn't playing. His eyes looked through her when she spoke. She found scraps of sheet music on the floor, scribbled with sharp lines and symbols she didn't recognize. One page had only a phrase written again and again in smudged pencil. She listens in the quiet. Then came the moment Elise would never forget. She had just gotten out of bed, unable to sleep, and wandered into the living room. The window was open again. The air was freezing. Daniel was at the piano, eyes closed, his fingers dancing over the keys in a slow, haunting pattern. At first, she thought he was sleepwalking, but then she realized he was whispering, barely audible, a murmur beneath the notes. She stepped closer. Daniel. He didn't flinch. His eyes remained shut. His hands kept playing. And then she heard it, his voice, soft, reverent. She's listening. She likes it when I play in the dark. Elise backed away slowly, her heartbeat in her throat. She didn't say another word. She didn't turn on the light. She returned to bed and waited for dawn. When Daniel finally came back hours later, he was smiling faintly, as if he'd just woken from a dream. Elise didn't confront him. There was no point. He was already too far from her, drifting into something she couldn't understand. That morning, Mia wouldn't speak. She sat at the table, staring at her cereal, then picked up her crayons and began to draw. Elise leaned over and saw. Another picture, this time of the piano, with shadowy hands reaching up from underneath it. When Elise asked what it meant, Mia just said, "They live under the floor now." Elise didn't ask anything else. Later that day, she took her journal, walked to the front desk, and asked the old manager if anyone had ever died in room 309. He looked at her for a long moment before answering. "No one should have been put in that room," he said finally. "It was supposed to stay locked." Elise waited. "Why?" He glanced around the empty lobby. "A long time ago, someone tried to take the piano out. Movers. They quit halfway through. Said it screamed when they touched it. Room's been trouble ever since." Elise left without saying a word. That night, the wind howled through the hallway. The power flickered. The piano played long, sorrowful notes, even when no one was near it. Elise sat awake, staring at the journal in her hands. The last line she wrote before closing it read, "This house is not haunted. The piano is." And she knew, deep down, that something was still unfinished. Something that wasn't ready to be silent. Chapter 4. Madness. Daniel was no longer himself. Days passed without him leaving room 309. He stopped eating, stopped shaving, stopped responding to Elise's voice unless it was about the piano. His eyes grew sunken, his skin pale, and his fingers trembled when they weren't resting on the keys. He barely slept, instead sitting at the bench for hours, playing the same mournful melody over and over again, each version slightly different, as if he was searching for something only he could hear. Elise tried everything to pull him back, gentle questions, memories of their past, even pleas from Mia, but nothing worked. His world had narrowed to one thing, the piano. One evening, as Daniel slept briefly on the couch, Elise made a decision. She walked over to the piano, determined to stop whatever was happening. She reached behind it, hoping to pull the power cord. Anything to disconnect it and give Daniel a reason to rest. But there was no cord, no outlet, nothing plugged in at all. The piano wasn't connected to any power source, yet it played. Cold sweat spread across her back. She stepped away quickly, heart pounding. Suddenly, Daniel stirred, eyes snapping open. "What are you doing?" he asked, voice low and sharp. Elise turned to face him. "It's not plugged in, Daniel. There's no power. This isn't normal." He stood, his face contorting with something between fear and rage. "You can't silence her. She chose me." Elise stared at him, stunned. "Who?" He didn't answer. He sat back down and placed his hands on the keys. "She only speaks through the music," he whispered. "You wouldn't understand." That night, Elise barely slept. She kept waking to the sound of low notes drifting through the darkness. At 3:09 a.m., she opened her eyes to silence. The music had stopped. She turned toward Daniel's side of the bed, but it was empty. She got up, fear coiling in her chest, and walked through the dim room. The piano was untouched. The air was thick and unmoving. Then she heard a whisper, faint, repeating, coming from the hallway. She followed the voice, barefoot, moving slowly toward the cracked mirror at the far end. There stood Daniel, unmoving, staring into the broken glass. His lips moved softly. "She's here," he whispered. "I saw her in the glass." Elise didn't speak. She gently touched his shoulder, but he didn't react. His eyes were locked on his own reflection, or perhaps something behind it. When he finally turned to her, his face was blank. "She's waiting for the ending," he said. "I almost have it." He returned to the piano without another word. The next morning, Mia refused to get out of bed. Elise found her under the blanket, clutching her drawing pad. "I had a bad dream," she said. Elise sat down beside her. "What kind of dream?" Mia slowly handed her the new drawing. It showed the piano in black crayon, large and looming. Surrounding it were 6 grey figures with blank faces. No eyes, no mouths, just outlines, hands reaching out toward the instrument. They were singing, Mia whispered. Elise felt something shift in her chest. Who were they? Mia shook her head. "I don't know, but they don't want Daddy to stop." Elise tried to hide the paper before Daniel could see it. He didn't notice. He hadn't spoken to Mia in days. All his attention belonged to the keys, to the whispers only he could hear. That evening, as the sun began to set, Elise took a long look at her husband. He was hunched over, skin pale, lips moving as he hummed under his breath. The tune was twisted now, no longer soothing. It sounded like something unraveling. She walked outside for air. The sky was grey, the wind sharp. One of the hotel's side windows was broken, a long crack splitting it like a scar. Elise stared at it and thought of Daniel's voice. "I saw her in the glass." Something about that mirror. Something about reflections. She turned away and walked back upstairs. The hallway to their room seemed longer, quieter. The hotel itself felt like it was holding its breath. When she entered, Daniel was still at the piano. The notes were louder tonight, almost angry. Elise called his name softly. No answer. He didn't blink, didn't move except to play. She touched his shoulder. "Daniel, please. Come back to us." He looked at her finally. His eyes were red, distant. "She's almost finished. I just need one more note. Then she'll rest." Elise backed away slowly. That night, Mia crawled into Elise's bed again. She didn't speak, just held her tightly, eyes wide open. Neither of them slept. Down the hall, the music played long into the early morning, each note sharper than the last, and somewhere in between, beneath the sound, Elise thought she heard something else, breathing. Not Daniel's, not hers, something deeper, from the shadows, from the space just behind the piano. Chapter 5. The Truth Behind Room 309. Elise could no longer deny that something was deeply wrong with Room 309. Daniel was gone in every way that mattered. Mia was growing pale and quiet, drawing faceless figures and whispering to herself. The hotel felt colder with each passing night, the air thicker with silence. Elise had stopped writing in her journal. She no longer needed to keep track. Everything blurred together now. But there was one question she couldn't let go. Why that room? Why that piano? And why did it feel like something or someone was waiting? One grey morning, while Daniel sat hunched at the piano, playing a melody so slow and dissonant, it made the walls feel like they were breathing. Elise took a walk through the town. Most of the buildings were empty. Dusty windows, locked doors, faded signs. But the library, tucked between a shuttered diner and an old post office, was still open. It smelled like paper and time. A woman in her 70s sat behind the desk. Elise approached and asked if they had any archives, anything about the Briar Glen Hotel's history. The woman raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Back room," she said. "Bottom drawer, microfilm and clippings." Elise spent hours digging through yellowed pages and brittle envelopes. Nothing seemed relevant until she found a thin file labeled June 1956. Inside was a single newspaper clipping, torn at the edges but intact. The headline stopped her cold. Young pianist vanishes, mid-performance, body never recovered. The article told the story of Clara Bell, a 21-year-old pianist considered a prodigy of her generation. She had been invited to play a private concert at the hotel, then a retirement home for musicians. Witnesses described her performance as breathtaking, but midway through the final piece, the room went dark. A loud bang echoed through the halls. When the lights returned, Clara was gone. Her seat was empty, her sheet music scattered across the stage. Some claimed to have seen a shadow moving toward the grand piano. Others remembered hearing the music continue long after Clara had vanished. Police searched for days. The stage, the basement, even the woods behind the property. But no trace of Clara was ever found. Her body was never recovered. The hotel shut down within the year. According to the article, room 309 had been her suite. Elise stared at the name, Clara Bell. The initials were carved faintly into the edge of the piano bench. She had noticed them weeks ago, but thought nothing of it, until now. Elise made copies of the article and returned to the hotel, heart pounding. She showed the paper to the hotel's manager, the older man who had first handed them the key. He didn't seem surprised, just tired. Should have stayed locked, he muttered. That piano doesn't belong to anyone but her. Elise pressed him for more. He sighed. After the concert, they tried to move it. Took 4 men. They got it down 1 flight of stairs before all 4 quit. Said the thing felt alive. Said it screamed when they dropped it. One said he saw blood on the keys. Room 309's been sealed ever since, until you folks showed up. Elise clenched the paper in her hands. Why give us that room? The man shook his head. I didn't. The key was just there. That night, Elise returned to the room, the article folded in her coat pocket. Daniel was at the piano again, playing something she didn't recognize. The notes were slow, halting, like footsteps in an empty hall. She approached carefully. Her name was Clara, she said quietly. She played here, in this room. That piano was hers. Daniel didn't stop. I know, he whispered. She told me. Elise felt the air around her tighten. You have to stop. I can't, he said. She needs to finish it. She's been waiting. I'm the only one who can help. Elise stepped between him and the piano. This isn't music, Daniel. It's a grave. Daniel looked up at her, eyes red and full of something she didn't recognize. It's more than that. It's memory. It's pain. It's her voice. That night, Mia drew again. Another picture of the piano, but this time with a girl sitting at it. The girl had dark hair, a long dress, and a soft glow around her. Behind her were shadows, tall and open-mouthed. Elise asked, "Is that Clara?" Mia nodded. She's sad. She never got to finish her song. Elise tucked the drawing into her journal. That evening, the music grew louder. The walls seemed to pulse with every note. Elise felt the floor vibrate beneath her feet. She covered her ears, but it didn't help. The sound wasn't just in the air, it was inside her. She looked at Daniel, still at the keys, lost in the melody. Tears streamed down his face. Elise moved toward him, shaking his shoulder. You have to stop. He looked at her, and for one moment she saw him again, really saw him. Then his hands dropped from the keys. Silence, for the first time in weeks. The piano was still, but the room felt heavier than ever. Elise looked around. The curtains didn't move. The lamp didn't flicker. The air didn't shift. Then the piano played a single note, all by itself. Daniel stood, backing away slowly. She's here. Elise turned to the mirror above. The dresser, the same one Daniel had whispered to before. In the glass, just behind her reflection, was a figure. A woman in a black dress. Her eyes were gone, her face hollow. Elise turned, but the room was empty. When she looked back at the mirror, it was just her again. Daniel fell to his knees. She just wanted to be heard. Elise helped him to bed. Neither of them slept. The next morning, she checked the piano. It was cold, still, but the name was there now, clearly etched into the wood. Clara Bell. No one ever touched it again. A week later, they left the hotel. Daniel didn't say goodbye. He never spoke about the music again. But sometimes, when he's near an instrument, his hands start to tremble. And sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, Elise still hears it. One note, echoing through the dark. Waiting. Elise and Mia flee the hotel. Daniel stays behind. No one ever saw him again. But sometimes, on stormy nights, the staff hears jazz music coming from room 300, even though the room's been empty for years.